Right, everyone. So the purpose of this next video is to show you around Photoshop very briefly. Photoshop, those of you who've used it at all, know that it's a huge program. We could spend months or even years trying to learn all of what it has to offer. But again, much like what we just did with PicMonkey, the goal with this project is to choose one photograph. It can be a different photograph than the one you worked on in PicMonkey. And then you're going to edit and save 4 different versions of it, again, to kind of explore how your editing choices, color, crop, color filters, artistic filters, things like that, are going to change the way that that image looks and kind of the emotional feel and meaning attached to it. And in doing so, it's also going to sort of force you to, work your way around Photoshop. So I'm going to give you a brief tutorial on that, and then you can go ahead and give it a shot. So as usual, first case scenario is we have to open up an image. And with this, we can go into Bridge, and you can navigate to your folder. And as a review, I didn't go over this in the previous one with PicMonkey, but to find your guys' folders, you're going to want to start by clicking on Computer. Mine doesn't show it, but you'll have the Network folder here that says Digital Photo or Photo. And then in that, you're going to have the Teacher folder, and then the Class folder, and then your own folder, and then your Scavenger Hunt folder. So it's kind of a little bit of a pathway, but you'll get used to doing that. So you want to go into your folder. I'm going to navigate to my desktop where I know this folder lives that I've made. And I am going to open up some stuff from there. So if I go into the Scavenger Hunt folder, I'm going to choose a different photo than I did before. These ones are kind of abstract. Maybe we'll go up and play with my lovely dog, Oliver. Okay, so I'm going to choose this image. And in Bridge, what I can do is just double click on the photo, and it's going to automatically open it up in Photoshop. And one thing that's confusing is that you can see both programs at the same time. So sometimes you don't know where you are in a program. So whichever one is activated is going to show up here in this top left corner. So if I click behind it, you'll see how now it changes to Bridge. And then if you can't see the Photoshop window behind, you can always click on the icon in the dock, and it'll take you right back. So just kind of some navigational things. I can make this full screen and go up here so then I can kind of eliminate Bridge from the background. Also, just so you know, you've got in Photoshop basic stuff to just kind of understand where you are. This menu bar up here is always going to be here. It was not going to change, but this menu bar right below, that's going to change depending on what tool you have selected, and this is your toolbar on the far left. So if I select this top tool is my move tool, you'll notice that that top menu changed, and as I move my way down the list, then this secondary menu will change, so it gives you some more options. My image will be here. If you were to open up multiple pictures, they get linked along this top menu bar, and then you can pull pictures off like so, and then you can link them back up. And if you just pull it to the top of the screen, it'll link back up. Other things are, you have a bunch of layers and things like that, and that's nice to see. So if you want to see something in Photoshop, like a menu option, and you're not seeing it and you normally do, it lives in Window. So if I go to Window and I choose any one of these things, it's going to bring up a window of menu options. So things that you guys are going to want to see always are adjustments. And then you're going to want to see layers, which is already checked. If there's a check mark, then it's already up, and my layers are here. Sometimes it's nice to see your history, so I'll add that into the mix. And okay, so now we're kind of ready to get started. So again, this is brief. This program is huge, but any tutorial on it's going to take a little while to tell you about. So in this tutorial, just basic stuff. So how do I crop? How do I adjust my color? How do I make an image black and white? How do I find some artistic filters? And then how do I save, essentially. But 2 ways of thinking about how you're going to adjust a photo. If you look right here in your Layers tab, I'm going to see this a little small thumbnail of my photograph. Now I can adjust using what's called layers, which would be in these adjustment layers up here. And what it's going to do, if I click on one, it's going to add an adjustment layer. So here's my little thumbnail original picture, and now there's a layer. It's almost like a clear piece of glass above that image that's going to hold this adjustment. And the beauty of that is that you're never actually adjusting your original picture. You're kind of just adding to it, and you can at any point you can turn it off, turn it back on. Let's just to make it obvious, like if I turn this way down, so then I can turn it off and it goes back to my original. Turn it back on and it shows you what you've done. You can also, if you're like, oh, I don't like that, why did I do that? Then you can take it and you can drag it to the trash can and get rid of it entirely. So that's one way of dealing with something. And there's pluses and minuses depending on what your end goal is. We're going to have some projects along in the course where adjusting in layers isn't that great because it's going to mess up your next steps. But, you know, for just standard stuff, it's a really good idea. So you've got adjustment layers. You also can do all of the same things that you can do in these adjustment layers if you go up to image adjustments. They all live here. The difference is that now when I click on that, you'll notice I didn't get a little thumbnail down here. I am just adjusting the original photograph, which is appropriate as well. You just want to be careful when you save that you give it a new file name so you never actually save over your original image. So this is things that we would call like a photographer's workflow, and you're going to kind of develop your own. Everybody, it's kind of personal to each person, but this is just some options that you should know about. So starting from the beginning, and I'm just going to show you actually in the image adjustments pathway because it makes it easier for you to see the names of everything. But just know the same thing, if you hover your cursor, lives over here in your adjustment layers, and it will, like I said, when you click on it, it's going to offer up a new layer, and then you can adjust, and then you can, you know, keep that layer, get rid of that layer, turn it on, turn it off, all of those things. Okay. But for the sake of keeping this kind of clean and easy to understand, I'm going to go up here. So when you're adjusting a photograph, one of the first things that you're going to want to do is adjust what we call your exposure, which means the amount of light in the image, the lights, the darks, and what we call the mid-tone areas. You want to get that right first because it does have an effect on the color. So if you were to adjust your color first, then you go back and adjust the exposure, you're kind of going back and forth a little bit more than you'd like to, okay? So step one is that we always adjust the exposure. So if I go up to image adjustments, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then kind of like a secondary 5 tools here, or adjustments that you can use to adjust the light in your photograph. So this first one is brightness and contrast. Very simple. You just make the picture brighter or darker. Make it have more contrast, which means like increase. In this sense, it's like making your black areas blacker. Or actually what it's doing on this slider is it's making the blacks blacker and the whites whiter. So you're kind of like widening the gap between the darker areas of the picture and the lighter areas of the picture. And or lessening it by pulling in some more midtones when you bring it down. Okay? So that's one option. Another really wonderful tool and my personal favorite is levels. Okay, so in levels, you can do several different things. You can, right here, you have this black. This is a mid-tone and a white little eyedropper. You can click on the black and then go into, and you're actually setting a black point. So you're telling your image or the computer what is black in your photograph, which then means that you can make something that isn't actually true black, and it will adjust the color, and you'll see what happens. So if I click here, I told that area is black. So now it has set that as my black point and adjusted exposure accordingly. I can do the same thing with what I would want to say is one of my lighter areas. And you'll see this has an effect on the color. And then I can adjust my mid-tone by moving this slider to kind of how I think it looks good. So now this image got a lot more contrast because I was doing that. You can also, that's what it looked like before, if I go back into that tool, image adjustments, levels. So that's one way to do it. You set your black and white point. You can also adjust via this slider here. So this is my black point. So it's going to look kind of the same. You know, by pulling it in, you're making those black areas, or the areas in your image that are darker. Pulling in the white point, so kind of adding some contrast. Both of these things are adding contrast to your image. And then adjusting your mid-tone values to however you like it. Now, typically photographs, you want to adjust them so they have a lot of pop, we would say. So high contrast is good to an extent. You don't want to lose detail in things. You know, you don't want to be able to not see the image. And you don't want it to be too harsh, but you do want to increase some contrast. So playing with that, okay? There's a lot more you can do with levels, but I'm going to kind of keep it pretty simple at this point. Hit OK if you like it, hit cancel if you don't. Okay, another thing you can do. And actually, I'm going to go back because maybe I don't want to keep this because I want to show you exactly what it does. So I can do two things. If I did something and I'm like, oh shoot, I actually want to get rid of it. I can do a Command Z on the keyboard, which will step me back one step. Or the reason why I had this history, which is hidden under all this stuff, you can go back in your history and actually walk yourself through every step you've done since you opened the picture, which is quite nice if you want to go back more than one step. Okay, so those are options for kind of undoing. Command Z, or up here, let's see, edit, usually the undo right here, this is Command Z, or step backwards will take you through individual steps, or your history, which again we found in this window history. Really useful things to have. Okay, next exposure control is curves. So curves is really powerful. You can, in curves, you can actually plot points along this line, and then by moving it, you can start to adjust. I'm not sure, is my preview on? Yep. You can start to adjust exposure, and it's not going to affect the whole picture. You're going to be able to kind of start to adjust just pieces of the picture, which is kind of the power of curves. So instead of it being what we call a global adjustment, it's going to adjust the whole image. It will adjust just local pieces of it, smaller pieces of it. So you can be a lot more precise. You can still set black and white points here and then adjust along the graph. You can also choose some presets in here. Again, very powerful, gonna take some time to really bond with it. So those of you who are like you've been in Photoshop, you feel pretty comfortable and you're up for a challenge, really trying to learn how to do curves would be your next step, a little bit more challenging. Next one is exposure, my least favorite of the bunch, primarily because it's very intense. It's like you can barely get off center point and you've almost wrecked your image. So I don't really like using it for the exposure piece, but offset is a really quick and easy way to add some contrast, and it works pretty well. So if you have your image pretty close and you just want to give it a little boost, offset is quite nice. But other than that, I don't tend to use it much. Okay, so those are exposure adjustments. That's step one. So we're going to get our picture looking as good as we can using these. The next thing you would want to do, and I'm just going to boost this thing up a little so we can move on and see how this color builds off of it. The next things that you would want to adjust are color adjustments, and you have quite a few here. Okay, so you can use vibrance. Vibrance is just going to make them brighter, less bright. Okay, so kind of dull colors or really bright and kind of saturated colors. Saturation is actually going to increase like the purity of the color. So like it's trying to get, yellow will be pure yellow and it's not as mixed with other things. So it can be quite strong. You want to be careful. Desaturating things will actually make it black and white. So just keep that in mind. That's another way to make your image black and white. So vibrance and saturation. You can also use hue and saturation, which is pretty fun. So hue is another word for color. So by adjusting the color, I can actually change the color in the image. Saturation, again, in the same window, you can make the colors more pure and bold and just really vibrant, or you can desaturate, and then of course you can make things lighter or darker, all in the same window. Another cool thing is that if I click on this little hand, then I can click on a color in the picture, and then it's going to choose that color for me here, and then I can change just that color, and it's going to pick up on, you notice it's not just on the flower, because wherever that pixel number showed up, any element of that red that you're seeing over here will also change. That's one kind of quick way of adjusting like colors of just small portions of the image. You could also make it a little bit more saturated. So a lot of times, like landscape photographers in the fall, they'll choose, the beautiful fall colors, click on that, and just boost the saturation of that a little bit just to make it pop a bit more. Or I could take down the saturation and actually remove the color from that without removing the color from the whole picture. So those are some fun things. This can be a really fun tool. You've also got now your black and white. So if I click on black and white, you've got a default setting of black and white. You've got all of these different presets, which are going to have different effects on the black and white. So you can play with that. Some are good, some are not great. Just depends on what you're looking for. You can also go into each channel and kind of like create your own black and white by adjusting each channel individually. So that's pretty powerful. So you can really get kind of technical with your black and white here. You've got some photo filters. These are like warming and cooling filters. They'll just adjust the color. And I think I skipped one up here, color balance. So this one's pretty awesome. It's designed for, a lot of times under different lighting circumstances, it gives a color cast to your picture. Like for example, in the living room, you may have seen some old pictures of Christmas morning or something where they're all yellow and orange. That's because of the incandescent or tungsten lighting that you have in your house. In the school, sometimes things look green, or especially like in the ice rink. Anytime we took hockey pictures for yearbook, they'd come out green because of the fluorescent lights. Sometimes outside in the sun, things look yellow. Your flash can make things look blue, or the shade can make things look blue. So if you're trying to get rid of that color cast, it's sort of, you need to neutralize it by adding a complementary color, because two complementary colors mixed together create a neutral. So if I neutralize that color cast, then I can take it away. So for example, if I wanted to make this image, less warm, I want to kind of reduce those yellow tones in it, then if I add blue, it's going to start cooling it off. Now you want to be careful because anything done to the extreme can kind of ruin it, but you'll see it in the lighter areas of the picture. A lot of times it's called white balance because you're looking at the lighter or the white areas of the image to see what color they become. If they're warm and they're yellow, then it's kind of on the warmer side. Or if they become blue or green, it's on the cooler side. So you can do that. If something's too pink, too green, you can add pink. If it's too green, you add a little bit, or too pink, you add a little bit of green. It's the opposite. And again, the goal is to neutralize that color cast until you come up with what you're seeing as either pure color, natural color, or even just the color cast that you're looking for. You can change it too. It doesn't have to be like natural or accurate. So that's your color balance. You can also go down in here. This was actually an exposure control, but it's pretty powerful. Shadows and highlights. So this is another option. Right away, the shadows, it's going to brighten up the shadows. The default is 35%. So a lot of times that's too much. This is where we started. But I use it a lot for brightening up shadows. Maybe you have, you just want to see a little bit more detail in the shadow area. It tends to warm up your pictures a little bit. And highlights, I don't use this a ton because as you can see, it just really easy kind of like degrades the image. But it can be used to kind of pull in something that was a little bit blown out. But the shadows and highlights tool, again, is a favorite. So in here, in the adjustments, those are the main ones. There's a lot of other things we can do and we'll get there. but those are kind of the basic ones, starting with exposure, these ones up here, as well as shadows and highlights, although you can kind of use that whenever. Moving into color adjustments here. Sometimes you have to go back and forth because the color flattened out the picture. You want to boost the contrast, something like that. But that's general workflow, okay? Other than that, in your tool palette, powerful tool is the crop tool. You do want to keep things, before I move on, keep your move tool activated unless you are purposely choosing something else. Because otherwise sometimes you click the mouse and then this thing starts doing a bunch of weird stuff and you don't know what's going on. So keep it up at the top and then actively choose. But our crop tool is here. This is kind of a new thing I'm noticing in Photoshop. So they're giving you like a little tutorial when you go over it. So that's kind of nice. But if you choose this crop tool, you can choose to crop. So I can pull in. If I pull my cursor out, it curves, so I can rotate and crop my image. You know, and it's going to just gray out the part that would be gone. And then when you like it, if you want to initiate the crop, you just hit return. And it will, or you may have noticed up here there was a check. I could have clicked on that too. Another really powerful thing is you can put in sizes up here. So let's say you want to frame something for somebody and you want to print it out. Well, frames come in standard sizes. So let's say I wanted to make this a 5x7 picture. So it's written in, and yours may not be by default. Yours may say ratio. So you're going to need to go into here, click width by height by resolution. So the image wide, the frame would be 5 inches, and then 7. And then we always want to save our resolution at 300 pixels per inch. So you need to type that in. Now it's giving me wherever I move this, it's automatically going to crop that picture to 5x7 inches, which is nice. Now obviously I just kind of scaled it down, which I don't always want to do. But if you have a reason, again, you're trying to fit it in a frame or something. So that's another cool thing. I would make sure that that is off unless you actively want to do it, but it's no problem in keeping this at 300 all the time. The other thing that's really powerful is I can take this straighten tool. This isn't the best example of a picture, but a straighten tool, let's say you have a horizon line or like a pole, like a window or a door or something that's supposed to be straight and it's crooked and you want to straighten it up. If I just click, let's say we want to make his back perfectly straight. If I click and drag a line, it's going to rotate the picture so that now that is perfectly straight. Again, to initiate the crop, I hit the check mark or I can hit return. So it's really awesome for straightening horizon lines, which those of you who know me know I'm super picky about that, as most photographers are. Okay, so we've learned how to crop. We can adjust exposure. We can adjust color. The last thing that I would say to tell you about in this, and you're welcome to dig in deep with this project, but just basic stuff, you have a bunch of artistic filters here. So if you go into filter, you've got all of these filters. You've also got, if you go to filter gallery, oops, we're already clicked on one, but there's all this stuff, and as you can see, it'll give you a preview. So you can just kind of choose ones, and I don't always love doing this kind of thing, but it's fun at the beginning, and it'll definitely change the way your pictures look, and some of them you might really like. So each one is going to come with some adjustments you can make here, and then you can either cancel or hit OK to keep it. So those are also options. So what I recommend for this is that if you're like overwhelmed, and this program can be totally overwhelming, maybe your first picture, you open it up, your first version, say, and all you do is you boost the contrast, and then you save that one. And then your next one, maybe you make it black and white, and then you save that one. And your next one, maybe you play with hue and contrast, and you adjust and make the colors different, and you save that one. And then your last one, perhaps you do a filter. Like, you don't have to go nuts with this, but some of you guys will want to, and you can do whatever you want. But for each version, remember we're saving 4, you need to save it. So, and the instructions are always going to ask you, along with your contact sheets, to save as a JPEG. So how do we save? We're going to go to File, Save As, always, not Save. You want to have the control in this sense to give it a new file name, to choose the format, and also to send it where you want to send it. Okay, so I'm going to hit File, Save As. Up here, I'm always going to give it a new name. Edit 1, maybe it's P Edit 1. For Photoshop Edit 1, because your PicMonkey's already had Edit 1, whatever the case may be, okay? But you want to give it a new name. You want to make sure it's in the right place. And over here, it's going to give you the pathway. So your name should show up here. So it's in your original folder, scavenger hunt, and then you'll see it. Okay, so you want to just make sure you're in the right place. And then right here where it says format, that's how you can change. You know, oftentimes it's going to be Photoshop, which is fine. There's benefits to that, but when you want to turn something into Google Drive or Google Classroom, it has to be a JPEG so we can see it. So you want to choose this JPEG, just the regular one, not JPEG 2000. So again, new name, make sure you're in the correct folder, make sure you save as a JPEG, and then you're going to go ahead and hit save. Also, here, quality, always 12, maximum. We want to have the largest picture possible, okay? And go ahead and hit OK. So you're going to do 4 versions of that, and then you'll have your 4 from PicMonkey and your 4 from Photoshop, and then you will have still kept those 2 original pictures you were working off of, all of which, along with your contact sheet, you're going to turn it. And that's it, your basic intro to Photoshop.